On a chilly morning in New Orleans, a weary woman, juggling several jobs to support her children on her own, found herself nearly depleted of all her energy. Upon encountering a homeless man, overlooked and mocked by those around him, she immediately chose to offer her final $5 for a meal. Unbeknownst to her, this seemingly insignificant gesture had opened the door to an extraordinary chance. The man she was assisting was far from an ordinary beggar. He was a billionaire incognito, gauging the generosity of those around him. Monica Harris, a black woman, navigated through it all, yet remained an outsider to the experience. She drifted through a realm that felt foreign, a shadow gliding among those who turned a blind eye to her existence. Despite the ache in her feet from hours spent at the cafe and the soreness in her arms from scrubbing office floors, she persevered. Isaiah required his medication, the bills demanded attention, and there was no space in her existence for fatigue. She tightened her grip around the thin plastic grocery bag in her hand, fingers curling around its delicate handles as if clinging to something far more significant than mere bread and milk. And then she caught sight of him. The man leaned wearily against the towering, wrought iron gates of a mansion so vast it seemed capable of sheltering an entire community. His stature appeared diminutive amidst the magnificence of the estate, engulfed by the lavishness that loomed behind him. He donned a tattered jacket, the fabric worn thin, his jeans marked by stains and frayed at the knees. His shoes, if they could still be termed as such, were in disarray, the soles barely clinging on, the laces completely absent. Next to him, a worn piece of cardboard rested against the gate, its frayed edges curling with the passage of time. The message, hastily inscribed in trembling, irregular lines, declared, "I need help." Monica came to a gradual halt. She had encountered individuals without homes previously. She had observed individuals, both men and women, hidden in neglected alleyways, their postures bent against the chill, their gazes averted to escape the scrutiny of those who walked by. She understood the way the world regarded them. She sensed it in the cautious looks, in the slight adjustments of posture, as people noticed her in the grocery store line, tallying her coins. Yet this was unlike anything else. This was more disappointing. She was not the sole observer of his presence. A dapper gentleman in a navy blue suit strolled past, the sound of his polished leather shoes echoing on the pavement. He hardly acknowledged the beggar, a sneer curling his lips as his face contorted, as if the mere sight of the man had soured his senses. He let out a derisive snort, whispering, "Revolting. Secure a position before considering your exit." Monica sensed a knot forming in her stomach. A couple in their 50s stood a short distance away, the woman adorned with a pearl necklace and the man with a tie that was knotted too tightly around his neck. They gazed, but not with sympathy. "They're all around us now," the woman remarked, clicking her tongue against her teeth. "Ever since they began allowing them to rest close to the quarter," her husband remarked. "You hand them a dime, and all of a sudden they believe they have a place here." Monica's nails pressed into her palm. Then arrived the most challenging part. A young man in his early 20s, sporting blonde hair and expensive sneakers, strolled past with earbuds nestled in his ears and his phone clutched in hand. His gaze fixed downward until his foot inadvertently brushed against the outstretched leg of a homeless man. "What on earth is going on?" The young man recoiled as if he had just encountered something repulsive, his expression twisting in annoyance. "Are you kidding me? Step aside, please." The homeless man recoiled slightly, yet remained silent. He withdrew even more into himself, wrapping his arms tighter around his slender form, as if attempting to vanish completely. The young man released a theatrical sigh and shook his head in disbelief. Then, as if to emphasize his stance, he retrieved a wrinkled dollar bill from his pocket and flung it at the man's feet. "Here, buy yourself a clue," he scoffed before striding away. Monica sensed a fierce heat igniting within her chest. She felt the urge to express herself, yearned to shout at them, to compel them to notice him, truly notice him, just as she did. Yet, she had discovered long ago that those who regarded others with disdain rarely transformed simply because someone urged them to. Rather, she took action. She acted without a moment's pause, without a second thought. She approached the man as everyone else turned their backs. She knelt beside him, the chill of the concrete seeping through her knees, her coat whispering against the pavement. His shoulders slumped, his head lowered, and when he finally raised his eyes to meet hers, she found weariness in them, desolation, conquered. "Have you had a meal?" she inquired, her tone gentle and measured. The man blinked, uncertain of her reality. His lips, parched and fissured, opened just a fraction as he gave a slight shake of his head. "I understand, but not today," Monica acknowledged with a nod, her hand diving into the grocery bag. She retrieved the loaf of bread, placing it firmly in his hands before searching through her coat pocket for the last $5 bill. She confessed it wasn't much, "But if you're feeling hungry, you're welcome to come over to my place. I may not possess much, but I willingly share what I do have." The man's grip on the bread grew firmer, yet his eyes stayed fixed on her. His expression held a certain quality, a hint of disbelief, as if he were grappling with the reasons behind it all. "You really don't need to go through with this," he murmured softly. "Perhaps," Monica responded, "yet someone must take action." At last, a smile graced the man's face that day. The man remained still for a prolonged moment, gazing at the loaf of bread in his hands, as though it were an unfamiliar object, something he had not anticipated receiving. His fingers, worn and weathered from countless struggles, quivered faintly as they held the crinkling plastic. He swallowed, his throat straining against the parched sensation, battling the elusive words he struggled to articulate. The world had toughened him, worn him down until he ceased to anticipate compassion. Up to this point, Monica adjusted her position on the unforgiving pavement, her knees digging into the hard concrete. The heaviness of fatigue lingered around her, yet in that instant, it was a different sensation that anchored her. The serene, almost hallowed moment of a person who had remained unseen for far too long finally being acknowledged. She was uncertain about the reasons for her lingering presence. Perhaps it was the manner in which his shoulders drooped under the burden of whatever he bore. Perhaps it was the manner in which his deep, weary eyes, which seemed to have witnessed too much, fixated on the bread, as if it represented something far more precious than mere sustenance. Perhaps it was the familiarity of the experience, having encountered it in various forms and settings, recognizing the sting of neglect, the weight of dismissal, the sense of being diminished to mere inconvenience. At last, he released a deep, trembling exhale. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice almost a breath. It was rough, tense, as if someone had been silent for far too long, or perhaps just someone who had lost the memory of what gratitude tasted like on their lips. Monica acknowledged with a subtle nod, adjusting her stance ever so slightly. "It's merely bread," she remarked. Yet beneath the surface, she understood it was far more than that. The man tilted his head ever so slightly, his gaze fixed on the item he held in his hands. "No," he replied after a moment's hesitation, "it isn't." The way he articulated his words caused a tightening sensation in her chest. A brisk wind swept along the street, tousling the stray strands of hair that had slipped free from her hood. The city kept bustling around them, unaware. Individuals strolled by, deeply engrossed in their own realities, oblivious to the unfolding scene on the pavement. A pair of onlookers stole a brief glance but swiftly diverted their eyes, hesitant to engage in a situation that eluded their comprehension, a concept they were unwilling to grasp. Monica observed the man for a brief moment longer before she finally broke the silence. "Could you please tell me your name?" He paused, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. She noticed the instant he contemplated fabricating a story, offering her a name that would slip easily from memory. After a moment of stillness, he let out a slow breath, as though relinquishing an invisible burden. "Grant," he finally uttered. Monica gave a slight nod. "My name is Monica." Grant observed her for a moment, his gaze unwavering in a manner that stirred a sense of unease within her. Not due to its intrusiveness, but because it was uncommon for someone to genuinely see her, to truly recognize her presence. She looked down at his hands, at the untouched bread, and a pang of sorrow stirred within her. "Have you been here for a while?" A dry chuckle emerged from him, the sound coarse like gravel. He muttered, "Long enough." The response fell short of expectations. She felt a strong urge to inquire further, to uncover the story of how he had arrived at this point, what events had transpired, and whether there was anyone left who still remembered him, who still held concern for his existence. Yet, she had discovered long ago that certain inquiries bore an unbearable burden, and some scars were too profound to be unveiled by an unfamiliar face on the street. Instead, she posed the question that had been quietly haunting her thoughts since the moment she first laid eyes on him. What makes people behave towards you in that manner? Initially, Grant remained unresponsive. He sat there quietly, the bread now settled in his lap, his fingers wandering over the contours of the plastic absent-mindedly. He let out a long, weary sigh, his shoulders drooping even more. It's simple, he concluded, because when they look at someone like me, they perceive a challenge, an inconvenience, something they'd prefer to avoid rather than confront. Monica's jaw clenched. She understood he was right. He emitted a soft, sardonic chuckle, shaking his head in disbelief. I observe them, you see, those individuals strolling by. Their gaze upon me feels as if I am invisible. I belong here. It seems as though I must have done something to find myself in this situation, and perhaps that brings them some comfort. Perhaps that provides them with a sense of security. Monica understood his meaning perfectly. Individuals sought explanations for the suffering of others. It was simpler to think that someone was worthy of their pain, that they had invited it into their lives. It eased the world's fears, giving them a sense that as long as they followed the right path, they could avoid his fate. Grant shook his head once more, his expression a mystery. They fail to recognize my humanity, he whispered. Simply another matter to overlook. Monica's fingers tightened their grip on her coat sleeve. By now, she ought to have grown accustomed to this. The world was harsh. She understood that more deeply than many. However, that did not justify it. After a moment of silence, she declared, "You're mistaken." Grant cast a quick look in her direction, a hint of concern etching itself onto his forehead. Monica held his gaze, steadfast and resolute. "I perceive your presence." And she followed through. More than a figure in worn garments, more than a mere vagrant on the sidewalk, but a human being. A figure steeped in narrative, a person who once bore a name of significance, who harbored aspirations before life stripped them away. Grant maintained her gaze for an extended moment, a flicker of something behind his eyes. Uncertainty mingled with a hint of hope, though he appeared hesitant to fully embrace it just yet. Monica cast a fleeting look at the plastic bag resting in her lap before turning her gaze back to him. "Will you actually eat that, or will it just sit there and be admired all day?" A subtle smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. It may not have been significant, but it held its own value. At last, Grant ripped into the bread, snapping off a chunk and raising it to his lips. Monica released a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Life carried on, oblivious to their presence. Vehicles glided past, pedestrians strolled along, chatter floated in the air. Yet for a fleeting instant, amidst the hustle, there was a profound quietude. For the first time in ages, Grant felt a presence that made him stand out. The wind had gained a bit of strength, transporting the far-off buzz of urban existence, the steady honking of eager motorists, the subdued chuckles of passers-by bundled in scarves and heavy coats, and the sporadic clatter of a delivery truck jolting over bumpy streets. Yet, on this frigid expanse of pavement, nestled between grand estates and wrought iron barriers, silence reigned supreme. Monica adjusted her position, wrapping her arms around herself to fend off the chill. The chill was infiltrating, weaving its way through her coat, yet she hardly acknowledged it. Her thoughts were overflowing. Grant had scarcely laid a finger on the $5 bill she had handed him. He cradled it in his hand, his thumb mindlessly tracing its frayed edges, as if its burden was more substantial than it ought to be. He didn't take it for himself. He remained seated, gazing at it as if it were an alien object, something he couldn't quite claim as his own. Monica exhaled gently, observing the mist swirl in the fresh morning air. She finally admitted, "I understand." Grant lifted his gaze to her, his deep eyes probing, wary. What are we getting? She paused, then shrugged, feeling trapped. Grant observed her intently for a brief moment before shifting his gaze elsewhere. He reclined against the iron gate, releasing a long, deep breath. Indeed, Monica nodded, her fingers tightening around the sleeves of her coat. 2 years have passed since my husband passed away. Cardiac arrest. Without a hint, without a clue. In an instant he was present, and then, just like that, he vanished. She took a deep breath, her gaze fixed on her lap. I believed we would have additional time. We often believe that time is on our side. Grant remained silent. Monica released a sardonic laugh, her head shaking in disbelief. We may not have had wealth, but we managed to make ends meet. He toiled in construction, while I took on any job that came my way. Once he passed away, everything fell apart. A backup plan was absent. There's no safety net. It's just me, striving to keep it all in balance. She breathed out forcefully, as though voicing it made the weight of the words more substantial. I have 2 children. One of them, Isaiah, is 6 years old. He was admitted to the hospital just this week. Pneumonia. It's already troubling that they wish to confine him there. Yet she fell silent, her voice tightening with emotion. They will not proceed if I am unable to make the payment. Grant shifted his focus to her, the intensity in his eyes beginning to fade. Monica managed a feeble smile. 3 positions. That's the effort required to ensure we have shelter and sustenance. And even that falls short. Grant let out a deep breath, his head shaking in disbelief. Yet, some believe that poverty is merely a matter of choice. Monica chuckled, yet the sound held no trace of amusement. Absolutely, that's a favorite of theirs. The wind howled once more, shaking the iron gates that stood ominously behind them. Monica sensed the intensity of Grant's gaze, as though he was uncovering a part of her that she had desperately sought to conceal. You continue to persevere, he remarked at last. Monica cast a fleeting look in his direction. What other options do I have? Grant inclined his head just a touch, pondering her words. He exhaled softly and straightened his posture, rolling his shoulders as if to dispel an invisible weight. He gripped the $5 bill firmly, then carefully folded it before tucking it away in his pocket. I possess funds, he stated. Monica blinked, her mind swirling with uncertainty. She emitted a brief, humorless laugh. Excuse me? Grant took a deep breath, preparing himself for what lay ahead. He gazed at her then, completely, his deep eyes unwavering, unblinking. I'm not without a home, he stated. Not quite. Monica felt a knot form in her stomach. Grant straightened, his hands poised on his knees. I am Grant Kensington, he stated, his tone measured and intentional. I manage one of the most prominent private investment firms in this city. He motioned toward the grand mansion looming behind them, the very one they were currently seated in front of. This house belongs to me. Quietude. For a brief instant, Monica found herself frozen in place, her gaze fixed and unyielding. The phrases lacked clarity. She released a laugh that was almost breathless. Surely you can't be serious. Grant remained expressionless. I am not. Monica felt her heartbeat thundering in her ears. She gazed at him once more, truly taking him in. And suddenly, the details that had once felt disjointed began to fall into place. The way his voice held authority even in its gentleness, the way his posture exuded a subtle confidence, the way he spoke about the world with a depth of understanding that could only come from someone who had experienced it from multiple perspectives. She gently shook her head. Negative. Negative. This doesn't make sense. Grant delved into the worn jacket he wore and extracted an item from a sleek, black leather wallet. He opened it with a flick, revealing an ID carefully placed in one of the compartments. Grant Kensington, Chief Executive Officer. Monica felt a sinking sensation in her stomach. She glanced up at him once more, her thoughts swirling, attempting to connect the dots, to comprehend the sheer absurdity of it all. Why, she whispered, what on earth are you doing sitting out here like this? Grant's demeanor was composed, yet his eyes revealed an intensity, a profound depth, an unrefined emotion. He expressed a desire to observe. I was curious about the experience of being overlooked, of being regarded as if you were an outsider. He exhaled gently. I was curious about the number of people who would pass by. Monica struggled to express herself. She reflected on the individuals she had observed earlier, the contempt, the revulsion, the apathy. She had witnessed it countless times, yet never in this manner, never so clearly, so irrefutably. Her hands clenched tightly in her lap. So what? She inquired, her tone now subdued, yet cutting. Are you engaging in a sort of social experiment? Observing the lifestyle of the opposing perspective? Grant shook his head in disbelief. No, he replied. I seek clarity. Monica let out a breath, her head shaking slightly as she grappled with the overwhelming thoughts swirling in her mind. What insights did you gain? Grant maintained his focus on her eyes. Individuals like you are truly exceptional. Monica took a deep breath. The enormity of the moment bore down on her, overwhelming and impossible to fully comprehend in its entirety. She had entrusted him with her final $5. She had provided him with sustenance, unaware, with no anticipation of reciprocity. And now, he gazed at her as if he had stumbled upon an unexpected treasure. Monica averted her gaze, her throat constricted. What comes next? Grant fell silent for a moment. Then he said, Now I will assist you. She quickly redirected her attention to him. Grant retrieved his wallet once more, but this time he didn't merely display his ID. He produced a polished, ebony credit card and extended it toward her. He mentioned that this will take care of Isaiah's medical bills. Each and every penny. Monica gasped. She gazed at the card, overwhelmed by its sheer impossibility. You have no idea who I am. Grant beamed a genuine smile, inviting and confident. He remarked that you were unfamiliar with him, yet you offered him all that you possessed. Monica sensed a fracture within her, a delicate structure that had endured through sheer determination for an extended period. She fought against the sting of tears, blinking them away with determination. She extended her hand, her fingertips gliding over the surface of the card. For the first time in years, hope felt tangible and close at hand. It seemed genuine. Monica's fingers quivered as they lingered above the glossy black card. Her heart beat a frantic, erratic tempo in her ears. The burden of it all bore heavily upon her. Isaiah's delicate form tethered to machines, the mounting hospital bills looming like insurmountable peaks, and the relentless fatigue of juggling 3 jobs merely to make ends meet. And now, here it was, the answer to it all, cradled in the hands of a man who, mere moments ago, had been just another overlooked soul on the street. Her breath came in quick, shallow gasps. She was frozen in place, unable to articulate. Grant remained steadfast. He remained seated, his eyes unwavering, composed yet resolute, as though he had made up his mind about this moment and was merely biding his time for her to align with his thoughts. You don't have to do this, Monica whispered, her words slipping out softly. Grant let out a breath through his nose, giving his head a slight shake. Absolutely, I do. His voice carried a soft confidence, as though the understanding had taken root within him just as profoundly as it had within her. Simply because I can. And since you truly deserve it. The world was unnaturally quiet, as though the very air had been drained away, time frozen in place, leaving just the two of them on that frigid pavement, caught between their starkly contrasting lives. Monica's hands were clenched into tight fists on her lap, her nails digging into her palms. Throughout her life, she had battled. She had persevered, faced challenges that no one should bear alone. And she had never, ever sought assistance, for help had always been absent. Yet, at this moment it had, and she was uncertain about how to respond. Grant must have perceived it, must have grasped the struggle unfolding within her, for his voice took on a gentler tone. You don't owe me anything, he stated. This is not an act of charity. It's equilibrium. Monica stared at him, her brow furrowed in bewilderment. Grant reclined against the gate, his hand brushing over his weary features. Today you offered me something, he remarked. More than mere sustenance. not merely a handful of dollars. You noticed me. While others passed by without a second glance, you paused. For the first time in ages, I felt more than just a number, more than something for others to overlook. I found myself once more. His words resonated within her, touching a profound and unarticulated part of her being. Monica felt a constriction in her throat. For years, she felt unseen, navigating life like a mere cog in a vast machine. A faceless figure scrubbing floors, serving meals, tallying crumpled bills in shadowy rooms, while the vibrant city pulsed with life around her. She had never anticipated such warmth, insincere compassion, and now it lay before her, bold and unyielding, challenging her to seize it. She swallowed, her voice wavering. What happens if I'm unable to repay you? Grant offered a faint, weary smile, yet it held a sense of authenticity. He simply shrugged and said, "Then don't, or proceed in any manner you find possible. Assist another individual. Transform a life as profoundly as you have transformed mine." He breathed out, looking down at his hands. "Your impact on me has been greater than you may understand." Monica exhaled unsteadily, her fingers finally wrapping around the card, pressing it into her palm, as if to confirm its existence. It was genuine. This was genuine. Her eyes blazed with emotion, yet she held back the tears with unwavering resolve. She locked eyes with Grant, probing for any sign of doubt, for uncertainty, for any indication that this was an error. He would come to realize his mistake the moment she turned to leave. Yet there was nothing, simply a calm assurance. She nodded once, brisk and decisive, as if a choice had just crystallized in the moment. "All right," she murmured, her voice scarcely audible. Grant's expression became gentler, as though he had anticipated that very moment. Monica rose gradually, her legs rigid from the chill of the pavement, her body lingering in the aftermath of the recent events. She grasped the card in her hand, her fingers tightening around it, as though it could vanish at any moment. Grant stood up as well, flicking away the dust from his frayed jeans, his ragged disguise now feeling peculiar, almost foreign. He remained within it, yet he no longer seemed to belong. Not for her. Monica paused, shifting her weight, grappling with her words, struggling to comprehend this moment, to express her gratitude to someone who had transformed her life in just a few fleeting minutes. She simply asked, "Are you certain about this?" Grant released a quiet laugh, shaking his head as he tucked his hands into the pockets of his worn jacket. "No," he confessed, "yet I am proceeding regardless." Monica let out a quick breath through her nose, a sound resembling a laugh slipping out before she could contain it. For the first time in weeks, she found herself laughing. She nodded, shifting the strap of her grocery bag on her shoulder with a thoughtful gesture. After a brief moment of hesitation, she reached out her hand. Grant cast a quick look at it before taking it with unwavering resolve. His hold was warm, firm, a handshake that carried significance. "Thank you," she said, her voice unwavering this time. Grant offered a subtle nod. "Make the most of it." Monica tightened her grip on his hand for a fleeting moment before releasing it, pivoting sharply and striding away from the mansion, leaving behind the frigid pavement and the part of herself that had arrived here convinced that no one in this world truly cared. She forged ahead without a glance behind her. For the first time in ages, she found herself with a purpose to stride toward. The atmosphere was inviting, infused with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the faint sounds of children's laughter echoing from the nearby park. Monica strolled with a newfound lightness, her movements unencumbered by fatigue, liberated from the pressures of relentless work and mounting expenses. Life was different and it was better. A year had gone by, and during that time, she discovered something she never imagined she would find again. Stability. With Grant's assistance, she had obtained a stable position, not merely one for survival, but one where her worth was recognized, where she could truly thrive. She had relocated her sons to a more secure area, a residence filled with room, comfort, and promise. Isaiah was vibrant, sprinting once more, filled with laughter again. For the first time in years, she awoke without the weight of dread for the day ahead. Now, as she stood outside the serene little cafe where they had planned to rendezvous, she caught sight of him once more. Grant sat at a quaint table by the window, free from the worn garments of that chilly morning, unburdened by the weight of his experiment. He appeared as himself now, a figure of control and composure, yet somehow more buoyant than he had been previously. Upon catching sight of her, he rose, a gradual, sincere smile unfolding on his lips. "You look good," he remarked as she drew near. Monica flashed a sly grin, easing into the chair opposite him. "Your appearance suggests greater wealth." Grant chuckled, a smile spreading across his face as he shook his head in disbelief. It seems certain aspects remain constant. A serene quiet enveloped them as he took a breath and leaned in a bit, his face shifting to a contemplative look. "A lesson is due, you see. You revealed a lesson I never anticipated discovering." Monica arched an eyebrow, poised in anticipation. His smile became gentler. "Often it's those with the least who offer the most." Monica observed him intently for a moment, then nodded, her own smile widening. "And I discovered something as well," she remarked. "Kindness has a remarkable way of returning to us, occasionally in the most surprising manners." Grant raised his coffee cup in a quiet gesture of celebration. Monica reflected the gesture. For the first time in her life, she was truly living. She existed. Come along and connect with us by liking and subscribing to share impactful narratives. Remember to activate the notification bell to begin your day with deep insights and genuine compassion.